nothing more magical to me than being a journalist. There are lots of ways to make more money, but I don't think there are any ways to have a more interesting chance of seeing the world, learning about the world. After I graduated from Harvard in 1968, I had a traveling fellowship to go to France, but since it was right after the Student Revolution, I was supposed to be going to the Sorbonne, but there was no Sorbonne until late in the spring. And so I basically was looking at Europe, sort of got the idea that it would be a wonderful thing to be a journalist reporting on the world. I didn't get there right away. When I came back, I went to work in publishing for several years. Then I went to journalism school at Medill, Northwestern University. And so I was working for 3 different newspapers. One was the Mexico City News, so I got to do a little foreign policy stuff. Another was the Edinburgh, Texas newspaper, which is way south Texas. And the third was the Miles City, Montana Star. And at that time, Mike Mansfield of Montana was the Senate Majority Leader. Wonderful, wonderful man. There was no real correspondent from Montana in Washington, so the Medill intern was always treated with enormous courtesy and attention by Mike Mansfield and his staff. So it was just a wonderful time to sort of learn what Washington journalism was like. Sometimes journalists, we all get hooked up on the big national stories, but in a way, you make the biggest difference at the local level. When the Long Island Press folded, I had the option to go to work for Newsday or for the New York Post, and I chose the New York Post because I thought Rupert Murdoch would be an interesting person to work for, and he has been. I mean, it's been an amazing, I've been in the Post for nearly 30 years, and it has been an amazing time. We shouldn't all think alike. We shouldn't all engage in groupthink. Reporters all talk about how I'm just objective, just the facts man, and we fool ourselves when we say that. You know, the worst biases are the ones you don't know you have. I think that we have to be balanced eyewitnesses to history, and I think right now the bias is such that we're not very balanced. We report all the bad things and none of the good things, and then we justify it by saying, well, you know, a school opening isn't news, a school being blown up is news. But in a country like Iraq, a school opening is news and should be news. We just don't want to cover it. Covering national politics has always been terrific because it gives you an insight into how the American people think. When you go to see a candidate speak, you want to see whether the crowd gets more and more excited as he speaks, or whether the high moment is when they come in and then they're sort of, You're looking for what people talk about. You're looking for whether people bring their little kids to sit on their shoulders and see the future president of the United States. Two trips really stand out in my mind. One was in 1989 when the first President Bush went to Eastern Europe just as the Iron Curtain was about to collapse, and he was trying to help ease the transition between communism and capitalism. Another particularly wonderful trip was going with Bill Clinton to Europe on the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And that was just extraordinary. I mean, every reporter who covered that trip was just totally stunned by the grace, the humanity of the soldiers who fought in World War II and were now coming back. And, you know, they didn't think of themselves as heroes. They thought of themselves as survivors. The most poignant moment was covering 9/11. I was actually in New York on 9/11 and didn't go back to Washington, stayed here and waited for Bush to come up here. And being down at Ground Zero that day when he was trying to make himself heard to the hard hats who were digging, and he finally said, you know, they said, "We can't hear you," and he said, "I can hear you, and soon those folks who knocked those buildings, and those folks who knocked the buildings down will hear from all of us soon." It was just one of those moments that sort of click. It was a magic moment in Bush's presidency, and it was a magic moment in the history of the country. I never thought I would ever know somebody I loved as much as I love Neville. I met Neville on British Airways, on a British Airways flight He was coming over to work in America, and I was coming back from horseback riding in Portugal, and I was trailing a stream of carpets and riding boots and whatever behind me, and sat down, and next to me was this guy with blue eyes and a beard laughing his head off. And I think I fell in love with him the moment I met him. We used to do all kinds of wonderful things together, travel the world together, and go out, enjoy eating, enjoy wandering around. Our favorite place is Portugal, and we've been to Portugal many, many times, staying in old castles and wandering around, and just had a great time. We always meant to get married, never quite got around to it. We finally did it after I was diagnosed, and when the words in sickness as in health were very serious words. He is always there for me. He's always beside me. He carries in some ways a heavier load than I do. He is the most wonderful man I know. I cannot even begin to say how much I love him.
What are you most proud of?
Doing a good job, being an eyewitness to history, trying to tell what I saw, trying to tell it fairly.
You may say